Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I am Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Now, it's good afternoon to you, Richard, today.
And good evening to you, Geoffrey.
It is indeed evening, yes. Now, viewers, this episode, Reset, and in brackets, and found satisfactory, episode 253. Let's start off with Jim Leverett, 3028. I think the Indian government knew pretty much straight away why this aircraft was lost, as that would be the only reason for shoveling up the wreckage with track hose just days after this accident. Even if they had kept the wreckage, it seems likely that their site cleanup methods would have made it difficult or impossible to inspect for signs of water ingress issues. Replied by Guy UK, new is probably overstated, but they were very suspicious of the cause. That is right. They certainly knew maintenance was poor. This from a précis of reviews. Aircraft conditions, some passengers describe the cabins as dirty, smelly, and in need of upgrade, with issues like faulty seats, broken entertainment systems, and dilapidated bathrooms. If the parts the customer sees are like this, what about under the bonnet? Also, NB, dilapidated bathrooms. Richard, it's a pretty
Yeah,
powerful start.
it is, but we're showing a screenshot of an Air India cabin defect log, and it seems to be supportive of the in-flight entertainment and the lights and the bathrooms not being clean and so on. The standard practice in the what the customer sees is reset and found satisfactory. It's mentioned several times on that cabin defect log. And if you look at the screenshot a bit closer, you'll find the typical mix of seat lights not working, in-flight entertainment not working, the wash basin in the toilets a bit clogged, and even a cockroach was found by one passenger and suffered an untimely death. And what struck me is how often the phrase reset and found satisfactory occurs in this log. And if that is standard practice for the parts the customer does see, what is standard practice for the parts under the bonnet, so to speak, that the customer does not see? Is that also reset and found satisfactory? And if so, then Air India has a much bigger problem than we first thought. The DGCA does not order an audit of Air India aircraft without cause. They do not issue notices of non-compliance without evidence, and they do not levy steep fines for non-compliance without proof of level 1 safety issues. On the 18th of June, we published an episode, 121. We looked at the premature cleanup of the wreckage at the crash site before the international investigators could visit and before the data and voice recorders were read out. In my mind, that speaks volumes.
Indeed. Brandon M. Cheyenne Howard, 1077. Excellent coverage and comments today. Regarding condensation, water vapour is a very much part of our atmosphere. And whilst we are not fish, it soon becomes clear how much water there is when one sets a cold bottle of water on a surface. Within minutes, there is a pool of water as the water vapour is cooled to particles. In a humid climate, condensation can settle on anything that has a cooler surface. I would have thought the EE bays would have 24/7 dehumidifiers, especially when the aircraft visits humid climates. Enjoying listening to some excellent comments and your responses, no stone left unturned. Thank you both for this channel, and thank you to some very educating comments, commentators, and responses.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your nice comment and question. The Boeing 787, like all modern aircraft, has a sophisticated environmental control system, ECS. And that is for the whole aircraft, including the cabin, the equipment, the cargo areas, everywhere. The 787 ECS is one of the most advanced ever installed on a commercial airliner. And unlike earlier Boeing types that relied on bleed air from the engine, the 787 uses a bleedless architecture. This design choice fundamentally changes how the ECS operates and contributes to improved efficiency, performance, and maintenance reliability. There's a system called the Integrated Air System, IAS, and that includes cabin pressurization and air conditioning, avionics and electronic equipment cooling, cargo compartment air supply, and personal vent systems at each seat, recirculation fans, temperature control systems that allow each zone in the passenger cabin to be set at different temperatures. And the 787 maintains in the cabin a relatively high humidity level, 15 to 20%, because that reduces dehydration. And HEPA filters continuously remove all contaminants and particulates in the air. And cabin air is completely renewed every 2 to 3 minutes, ensuring fresh and clean air. But in the EE bays, humidity control is handled very differently from the passenger cabin. In the EE bays, the goal is not passenger comfort, but equipment protection. And that means the system aims to maintain a very low humidity to prevent condensation on circuit boards, avoid corrosion on connectors and wiring, and reduce risk of electrical arcing or short circuits. On the 787-8, the FAA issued 3 airworthiness directives between 2016 and 2025 regarding water ingress into the forward and aft EE bays. And the emphasis was on prevention, not detection. And there are currently no humidity or water detectors in the EE bays. And in my view, water detection should be installed as well. Prevention is great, seals, drip shields, routing, that fixes the root cause. But early detection in the EE bays adds a last line of defense for flight critical avionics. And given the history of water migration into 787 EE bays and the FAA's repeated prevention from their ADs and adding bay level water detection is, in my view, a prudent, low cost, low risk enhancement that complements the mandated fixes and materially improves resilience and maintainability.
Yeah. So Chris B, 1796, Richard, he asks, having the APU running prior to engine start during pushback and all the way through to, say, flight level 180, which is 18,000 feet, is just economically unviable. My old outfit encouraged us to routinely use single engine taxi in after landing on almost all of our fleets, especially wide bodies. This even extended to single engine taxi out to the runways prior to takeoff. Fuel is the single largest operating expense. During 25 years of experience, this single issue was repeatedly stressed and emphasized. It is abnormal to make such a suggestion. It is practically due to a 1 in 200 million flight hours event, frankly, is impossible. If every airline adopted this one procedure and ticket prices were adjusted accordingly, then maybe. but that's highly unlikely. Just consider the enormous maintenance, repair, and overhaul expenses. Indeed, why not also promote running the APU during descent through landing, starting at flight level 180 until parked at the gate? A contrasting view from Michael Barber, 5651, who says it makes no sense that the APU isn't running on takeoff or landing, even more so on an electric aircraft, all carriers being cheap with our lives. Two very stark views there, Richard.
Yeah, and opposing views.
Hmm.
Um, to Chris, as an experienced pilot, we have actually said before some operators mandate APU on for takeoff. This isn't universally mandated by manufacturers, but it is recommended by all aircraft and engine manufacturers. Boeing state generally the APU may be left running during takeoff to provide additional electric power and a source of redundancy. In the 737NG and MAX FCOM, they state APU electrical power is desired for redundancy or when environmental conditions require additional system margin. Airbus in the A320 FCOM state it is recommended to leave the APU bleed on for takeoff in hot conditions at high altitude or when performance is limiting. In the A330 and A340 FCOM, APU bleed may be used for takeoff. This configuration improves takeoff performance by relieving engine bleed load. On the A350 and A380, Airbus say the APU can be left on for takeoff to provide electrical or bleed air redundancy if required. So, firstly, we have not recommended a fixed flight level of, say, flight level 180, as you suggest. We have recommended until the pilot in command determines that a safe altitude has been reached. A safe altitude depends on many factors and also on any NOTAMs that are currently in force. At Ahmedabad Airport, they did issue a NOTAM on bird activity. It was about a week after the crash. A new NOTAM was issued warning of bird concentrations at the airport. Now, keeping the APU on for takeoff and initial climb and leave it on until the pilot in command determines a safe altitude has been reached, and considering aircraft status, performance, terrain, obstacles, traffic, ATC requirements, weather, current NOTAMs, is just a suggestion. The EAIP entry for VAAH Airport also notes seasonal bird activity around the airfield, reinforcing that this is a standing hazard, and pilots in command should factor that into the safe altitude decision rather in relying on a fixed flight level. Now you talk about the cost of keeping the APU on, and we're showing a screenshot of the fixed and variable costs in running an airline. And you're quite correct. At the top of the list is fuel, the highest cost, 25 to 35% of the total operating cost. And even worse than that, fuel costs are highly volatile, and financial hedging of the fuel cost is quite common. And you can take a look at the other costs, but I agree with you, fuel does dominate. And those airlines that mandate the APU remain on for takeoff will, of course, have a higher fuel cost. but that will be passed on to the customer in higher airfares. On a 787-8, an extra 0.02 to 0.05% fuel cost per flight will be incurred. For a typical long-haul airline, that'll work out at about $1 to $2 million per year across the whole fleet. But that is negligible cost compared to insurance, maintenance, or the cost of delays. So I agree it is an economic issue, but I disagree that it's economically unviable. It is up to the operators and regulators to ensure an airline is safe, and it's up to the customers to choose with which operator they fly. The only scenario in which APU operation is formally mandated is for ETOPS, extended range twin engine operations, or ETTO, extended diversion time operations. And it's a requirement for dispatch and for entering an ETOPS zone. So, Chris, it sounds like the bean counters were hard at work at your airline, switching off one engine for taxi to save a few kilos of fuel. But the engine manufacturers don't see it that way. Both GE and Rolls-Royce explicitly state that engines must be allowed to idle for at least 2 minutes after startup before any taxi movement. And that period allows oil temperature and pressures to stabilize, ensuring proper lubrication of bearings and gearbox components. And skipping or shortening that warm-up might save a bit of fuel, but over time it increases wear, thermal stress, and the risks of hot section distress. And those costs far outweigh any short-term fuel savings.
Might mention here, Richard, NOTAMs, for those who don't know, are notice to airmen. They're warnings about various situations. So one of those acronyms we need to explain.
Well, there are lots of acronyms and abbreviations.
So Yoda B at 1, 1746, he says, there is one discrepancy that I would like to hear cleared up, and that is when signal is lost from the thrust levers, does that cause the engines to go to idle, or does that cause a complete shutdown? It sounds as if you are saying they drop to idle, which would make more sense than a complete shutdown and subsequent relight. If the engines did in fact go to idle, it might indicate complete loss of cockpit information, and because of this, the pilots assumed flame out and cycling of fuel cut-off switches. The exhaust gas temperature sensors would still see a massive drop from toga to idle, giving the impression of flame out. Is it possible that if the engines were at idle, once data was re-established from the thrust levers, they would have picked up again? It should be remembered that sensors such as WOW sensors are not individual. There is not just one sensor that if it fails, the aircraft becomes dangerous. There are multiple inputs to the flight computer. Additionally, there are redundant systems ready to take over a failing system. That is why it has taken so much effort to narrow down the plausible hypothesis of failure. Richard's suggested changes he puts forward to the FAA make complete sense. Richard, can you explain that one to Yoda B at 1?
I will try. We've explained it several times before, but I will try again. The discrepancy between the term idle and the term shutdown is probably our fault, Yoda. We've used both over 100 times in different episodes. The term idle actually comes in 60 episodes and the term shutdown in 109 episodes. But we have also cited the Boeing and GE documentation several times in several episodes. And Boeing used both the term idle and the term shutdown. But here is the key difference. An engine at idle does not need a restart or relight. An engine which is shut down can be restarted or relit if it is not damaged. And the preliminary report specifically states that both engines were relit and uses the word relight 3 times. The preliminary report does not use the word shutdown or the phrase shutdown. It does use the word idle twice, so I think the preliminary report has caused further confusion. So let's go back once again to what the Boeing documents say. And I'm quoting from the Failure Isolation Manual. Failure of both CCR data channels results in engine shutdown command by the EEC. Note the phrase engine shutdown is being used. And this is the GENX1B EEC system description. Upon loss of valid throttle resolver or CCR link data, the EEC commands the fuel metering valve closed to prevent uncommanded thrust. And when the fuel metering valve is closed, then the engine doesn't go to idle, the engine goes to shutdown. And we've also discussed the 6 WOW sensors in 18 episodes, so I don't think we need to discuss them again, but your point is well made. There are multiple sensors on all of these various systems.
Richard Bodeman Tube, he says, gentlemen, I must strongly disagree with your assumption that the pilots would have consciously waited 10 seconds for the rat to deploy. Having conducted thousands of takeoffs in both Boeing and Airbus aircraft across a wide and narrow body fleet, I can assure you that if the cockpit workload immediately after takeoff is immense, the crew's attention is consumed with tasks such as verifying a position rate of climb for gear retraction, maintaining navigation accuracy, complying with ATC instructions, and monitoring aircraft performance, among many other priorities. To suggest that in those critical few seconds, the pilots would have the spare mental capacity and foresight to limit a 10-second delay for RAT deployment is frankly unrealistic. For the captain to consider RAT deployment time following dual engine failure and subsequent startle factor would be beyond genius level and the nerves of Yeager. That's Chuck Yeager. I respect your technical insight, but in this instance, I'm confident your assumption doesn't reflect operational reality. That's an interesting observation, Richard.
Yeah, and I completely and strongly disagree with it. What a surprise. Well, we've done 2 episodes on the captain specifically, and we do not use the word consider once in either. We've discussed the pilots in 92 episodes and defended their actions despite many other pilots and investigators and analysts condemning the pilots for causing the crash and blaming the captain in particular. I do not understand why, in this case, the viewer's chosen to twist my words and pretend I've said something that I did not say. So I actually reject the false and unfounded insinuation and the veiled or implied accusation. A pilot in an emergency situation will be driven by his training. and memory items as standard procedure. The captain was not considering, he was acting in accordance with his training and experience and knowledge. And I've never stated or suggested that in those critical few seconds, the pilots would have had the spare mental capacity, as you put it, and foresight to time a 10-second delay for rat deployment. And quite frankly, I find your wording is misleading and quite offensive.
Yeah. Okay. Ian Gill, 89, 84. I think I may have missed something. A few episodes ago, I asked about the various aircraft types and who maintained them. You kindly answered those questions as ever. A few further thoughts came to me. If several companies are maintaining Air India planes, how is their work recorded? Who is responsible? Do non-Air India facilities report to Air India or independently? Who is responsible or not? As a car owner, I'm always liable whoever services my car. Interesting observation, Richard.
Yes, it is, and makes a very good point. And you're absolutely right, Ian, to think about accountability. It's a crucial question in aviation maintenance. Not quite the same as the car owner analogy, but there you go. With a car, when an authorized car dealer does maintenance work for you, they are liable that that work is carried out correctly. The operator in aviation situation, for example, Air India, remains responsible for ensuring the aircraft is maintained properly and kept airworthy. And the maintenance organization is responsible for the execution and certification of maintenance tasks it performs. And all work done on an Air India aircraft, no matter where it's done, must be recorded in the aircraft's continuing airworthiness records and approved by the operator's Continuing Airworthiness Management Organization, CAMO. So, if Etihad Engineering or Aramco or Singapore Airlines do maintenance for Air India, or whether their own Air India ESL do maintenance work for Air India, it doesn't matter who does it, the work must be documented centrally by Air India's CAMO.
Mm. Joseph Cooksley, 3219, Richard, says RAT, 31 uncommanded RAT deployments in 14 years, just within a few months of a scheduled maintenance session. The deeper we look into this Boeing 787 family of aircraft, the more concerning the situation gets. Why would this be happening right through the life of this aircraft and especially after maintenance window? What happens if this happens when a 787 is at the gate being loaded or unloaded, climb or out of landing? It is becoming clear that this is happening when there's not an emergency situation. If there's something that's faulty with the system design, Richard has discussed how data stream interruption can throw up errors. Does the manual activation switch have a safety cover and is subject to accidental activation, or is there a deeper problem that even the most careful technicians are accidentally doing in their work routine to trigger rat activation at a later time? R&G, we need to get to the bottom of this rat issue. It is not so bad when the aircraft's 787s are flying in corridor where there are diversions, airports along the route. But over long ocean flight paths, this is a concern. Great analysis yet again, but the more we dig, the more what seems to be becoming is a checkered history of operation of the 787. They might not have fallen out of the sky, but safety systems are being compromised. Richard, I think that's a bit strong.
Yeah. Well, I would remind the viewers, 1 billion passengers carried without a fatality up until the 12th of June 2025. I wouldn't describe that as a checkered history. It's a very, in fact, fantastic safety record. And Air India is the only 787 operator in the world who has had a fatal crash. And there are over 80 other operators who've been using the aircraft in some cases since 2011, in other words, for the last 14 years, and have not seen a single fatality at all. And this figure of 31 RAT deployments is going through the media at the moment. And I think it is quite plausible over 14-year history. And it appears to be credible, but I still haven't been able to validate 31 RAT deployments from the publicly accessible airworthiness directives, the ADs, or service bulletins, SBs. So that's one point. We need to verify this data. The second is whether the RAT deployments in the case of the Air India VT-ANB aircraft was spurious or real. And that's a completely different question. And we know with VT-ANB there was a dual engine shutdown, and that alone will cause a RAT to deploy. Personally, I'm very happy with the Boeing 787, but I have to say I do choose my airline quite carefully.
Mm. Now, Richard, Joe Costacar 1298 brings us back to the toggly switches. Richard and Geoffrey, much attention is being focused on the 10 seconds having occurred between switches toggled to shut off and then back to run. I think we all need to understand that 10 seconds is not a long time. There isn't much difference between immediately and 10 seconds in the emergency situation the pilots were experiencing in this case. We have the benefit of hindsight, but the pilots were living this event in real time, a point many posters need to remember. I understand the 10 seconds delay concerning RAT deployment, and it is a possibility that the pilots were doing exactly as remembered, in other words, a memory item. But in light of all that was occurring in the cockpit, we should also understand how short an interval 10 seconds actually is. I think you'll agree with that one, Richard.
Yeah, I fully agree with that one. The entire flight was only 32 seconds, and in that time, the pilots managed to aviate and navigate and communicate. So they weren't doing too badly. And a few more seconds, and the outcome might have been quite different. I've also made the point that if the captain and first officer's instrument DC bus were both compromised due to a temporary electrical short, then actually nothing will happen by toggling the fuel switches. You can toggle them as much as you like, but it will have no effect until the DC power is restored, either from the main battery, when that is switched through, or when the RAT comes online electrically. The thrust control module, which incorporates the fuel switches, is powered by these two DC buses, and the relays to the SPA fuel valves are powered by the same two DC buses, and the remote data concentrators sensing the fuel switches is powered by the same two DC buses. And nothing will happen until the DC power is restored. So the preliminary report states, as per the EAFR, that's the flight data recorder, the engine 1 fuel cutoff switch transitioned from cutoff to run at about 08:08:52 UTC. And thereafter at 08:08:56 UTC, the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch also transitions from cutoff to run. What the preliminary report does not say is that according to the EAFR, or the Flight Data Recorder data, it doesn't tell us when the fuel cutoff switches were transitioned from run to cutoff. And why don't they mention it? Because they didn't want to say, or because it wasn't recorded? What the preliminary report does state is that, but not per the EAFR, but it does state with a 1 second precision that after 080842 UTC, engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff. And they did that with a time gap of about 1 second. And the aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode consistent with a liftoff at 080839 UTC. So the fuel switches went back to run 13 and 17 seconds after liftoff and 10 or 14 seconds after being positioned to cutoff. And my question is simply, was there a temporary electrical DC bus failure to both the captain and the first officer's instrument DC bus for around 10 seconds? That is the question we need to answer.
Richard, let's finish with this comment from Dr. Freelix 2051. Content capable of making the world a better place. My praise may be trivial, but you gents' efforts are anything but. Many thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, well, many thanks back to Dr. Felix, a very kind comment.
Was indeed. Yeah. So, Richard, fascinating episode. Thank you for answering those complex questions, probing questions. I know a couple of them we've done before, but obviously there's a little bit of confusion out there, and hopefully we've closed the loop on that.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome, and I hope if there are any outstanding questions, we will no doubt hear from the viewers.
Yeah. And viewers will be back tomorrow to answer more questions on Air India 171. And also, we've had quite a few questions on our episode about air crashes being solved by outsiders. And quite a few people have reminded us of some more crashes, Richard, that we'd overlooked. So
Oh, wow.
we'll address those as well. It seems like there's a host that we've overlooked. So shame on us.
Yeah. I thought, 23 that we had on our table was quite enough to make the case. But if we've only got half the story, then let's have the whole story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great. Once again, it's great feedback from the viewers to help us with these sort of issues, just as the way they are with MH370 and Air India 171.
Yeah, it is great.
Yeah. So, viewers, please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please do join us. And please keep those wonderful comments coming. They're chicken soup for the soul, I can tell you. And do keep those fabulous questions coming, even though they do challenge us. We do appreciate them very much. And we are building a wonderful community of pilots, engineers, etc. And this week, by the way, viewers, I'm not going to tell you who, but we've got two very, very special guests this week, one on Wednesday and one on the week after. And two outstanding people, which we are really super excited about, and I'm sure you will be too. So that's coming up, first one on Wednesday. So please do tune in tomorrow. We're a bit late tonight, and we're going to be a bit late tomorrow night as well. So please bear with us on that, but we certainly will be back tomorrow. So thank you very much indeed. Take care.